from the Key Radio Studios in Provo, Utah, and broadcasting live throughout Utah County, Sevier County, South Central Utah, Carbon County, and the Uinta Basin. It's your good friends Mike and Heather in the morning.
Hey, good morning. And thanks for joining us yet again for Mike and Heather in the morning. It's a pleasure to be with you. And hey, we want you involved with our conversation. So right away, I'm going to give the phone number, 855-539-4583. Get your phones out. We'll give it again in a little bit. But we do want you to send us a text and join our conversation today.
And it's going to be a good one today. But before we begin that, as always, I have a few things that I saw in the news. And by the way, Grant Burkhalter is in the pit. In the captain's chair is what somebody came in. There's a couple of people who came in yesterday and toured the station. And they're like radio people. And they're like, oh, and you got like what did he say it called? The captain's chair or something with all of the instruments and whatever. I'm like, that sounds much nicer than
I don't remember
pit.
what they called it. But yeah, it does, yeah.
The pit.
The pilot seat.
The pilot seat. So you've been promoted. Congratulations, Grant.
Keep an eye on the valves.
Yeah. Don't let us sink, please. Oh, man. And then also in the studio with us, this is pretty exciting. Talk about, I think it's God's providence. I really do. We didn't have anything really planned for today. We didn't have anybody coming in.
Well, we had somebody, but they ran into some medical concerns.
Yes. And I probably didn't tell them that they should come in anyway. So, anyway, what's so cool is we have a good friend a brand new good friend, and named AJ Meyer from Indiana.
Living in our parking lot.
And I'm excited because this is going to be a fantastic conversation. Sometimes the spur of the moment things I think are going to be the best things. And I have great hope for this particular conversation because it is a very practical one. So we have AJ in the studio with us. Good morning, AJ.
Good morning.
Thank you so much for coming, being so nice about it. Mike said it's going to be a short program, which is very funny.
It is.
55 minutes is short.
It is. It goes fast.
But, most of the world thinks short is in like 10 or 15 minutes. So he comes in here, and you're still a good sport. I appreciate that.
I'm going to try to be.
What have you guys gotten me into?
So AJ is preaching right now at a fellowship. Faith Community Church over in Eagle Mountain. So he's kind of filling the pulpit for a while, and like I said, living in our parking lot, not in a cardboard box, but in a motorhome.
And which is really just shows the heart of AJ because you don't even live in Utah. In fact, you are originally from Indiana. Is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah. So it's really nice that you're just like, okay, yeah, I'll come to Utah. That's incredible. That's incredible. And I don't know a lot of people who would just say, yeah, for a month or so. That's awesome. That's awesome. So we're going to talk more about that and more so about God's calling in our own lives. And are we the people who will say, send me? Yeah, I'll do what you want me to do, Lord. This is going to be good.
It's a great conversation, and it does tie in with yesterday's a little bit.
Yeah, being on mission, having purpose. And
that was a great conversation we had with Pastor Chad Johnson of Fellowship Bible Church yesterday. So if you're looking for something to listen to after the program today, go back and listen to the podcast maybe. Yeah,
absolutely.
Okay.
And we have a couple of we have a couple of
housekeeping.
Housekeeping. Thank you.
Yes.
Oh, I hate that word.
I know.
You were like Henry Winkler trying to say that he was wrong.
Yeah, exactly. The Fonz never says that. Yeah. That's awesome. 0.5K.
Yes.
We are celebrating the fact that it is coming up October 12th. And right now, registration is open. My friends, register today. Register very soon because it will fill up and we need to know who's going to be participating. I dare say competing in an event like this.
You could say competing.
Yeah, I'll eat my donut faster than you eat your donut.
There's a video out there that you need to watch because it's really funny. Grant put it together. And I think the funniest part in there is when Grant says, I have a coffee, I have a donut, I must be conditioning or something along that line.
I guess you could
training.
say this is
Yeah,
training. Yes, that is probably one of the best lines. And you can check that out on Facebook. You just 0.5K and check that out and like it and follow it and share it with your friends and whatever. But it's going to be fun. And the whole point, I mean, it's if eating donuts at the halfway point of a 0.5K, like 576 yards. It wasn't fun and purpose enough. This is actually, that has a higher purpose. We want to bless the Pregnancy Resource Center of Utah Valley and Salt Lake City. And let's just face it, I mean, people need helping hands. We need to come around people who might say, boy, I didn't expect this life event. And this is what we do. We're the hands and feet of Jesus. This is a fantastic ministry, a fantastic service. We're excited that there's going to be a PRC in Utah Valley, and we just want to promote it. We want to encourage people to volunteer, to support it, and this is just a great way of doing it. So.
Yes, and there's a limit to the number of people that are going to be able to participate in this. So don't wait until the last minute. Get registered now. Heather, do you have an idea how many have registered so far?
I do.
Yes.
I do. 7.
Okay. Well, you don't have to run there right now then.
You know what's going to happen? It's Utah. So like everything is going to happen like boom, all of a sudden everybody's going to flock. So
and we just about filled up last year. We
did.
We were going for 100 and we had
almost 100. Yeah,
I mean, there was over 100 people here, but participants, we had nearly 100.
Yeah, but just think of all the donuts we're going to eat.
Yeah.
It's going to be wonderful.
And we have, if you're watching the video, we do have inflatable donuts on our walls now in the studio.
Just to get into the spirit of things.
That's right.
Okay, enough of that. That was fun.
That was too much of that.
That was too much of that. Okay, interesting story. I do need to share an interesting story here. This is from Tokyo, Japan. There's a company called Piala Inc. It's a marketing firm in Tokyo, and they have decided to make a change with their employment policy. They are allowing non-smokers who work there to have 6 extra days off per year to make up for the time that they don't take for taking a smoking break. Isn't that interesting?
It is, yeah.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting.
You know, I don't think that probably is enough even from what I've seen in my experience.
I thought that was very generous and it was very kind. So I just had to bring that out there. And of course, my friend, let's just be praying, people. The Bahamas is just absolutely leveled. I mean, have you seen those pictures?
Yeah.
Oh, I can't even. I'm looking at the aerial photos and my brain is just, it's just awful. It's just awful. I can't make sense of anything that I am seeing because the buildings are just splintered. And it's amazing that a storm could do something so awful. Pray for, of course, the people in our own country, or in Florida, and as well. Funny story about a Florida guy who has this smart car and he didn't want it to blow away, so he put it in his kitchen. That was funny. I thought that's good. But in all seriousness, we do need to uphold people in prayer. There was one story of a Florida man who went to a store, purchased 100 generators to send to the Bahamas. I thought that was really giving, and what a neat way, a creative way of helping out. So anyway, thought you'd like to know about those things. Mike had said that there is a text line that we have, and if you want to contribute to the conversation, please do 855-539-4583. We are going to be talking about listening to God's leading. This ought to be very, very good.
Looking forward to it.
855-539-4583, 855-KEY GLUE.
Key Radio, Life Unlocked, Truth Unleashed. Thanks for joining us. It's Mike and Heather in the morning, and we're talking about, during the break, menudo, which is important to nothing.
Nothing. You could just figure out how old we are now. But more importantly, today we are going to talk about the Lord, and we're going to talk about listening to the Lord, and we're going to be talking about following the Lord.
Do you know where this starts? With you singing the song.
Oh. Well, okay, so there's this song called I'll Go Where You Want Me to Go. It was written back in, I think, 1891 by Mary Brown, who was Canadian. Later on, there was a man who took it and put 2 more verses to it, and I don't have his name in front of me, which is a bummer because that I should be attributing him to this as well. But then later, in 1894, Carrie Runsefeld, she took this and put different music to it for these revival type meetings that were going on. And it's a pretty neat song. but it basically says this: it may not be on the mountain's height or over the stormy sea. It may not be at the battle's front. My Lord will have need of me. But if by a still, small voice he calls to paths that I do not know, I'll answer, dear Lord, with my hand in thine, I'll go where you want me to go. So this is, and then of course the refrain is, I'll go where you want me to go, dear Lord, over mountain or plain or sea. I'll say what you want me to say, dear Lord. I'll be what you want me to be. Now, this is a song that is really saying, I'm your servant. I'm your slave, Lord. Whatever you want, I will do. And which really flies in the face of humanness, because we're very selfish.
Yeah.
Selfish.
And this song is great. Heather, I remember you singing this at least one missions conference or missions fair.
Yes, this is one of the favorites. And but when you sing songs, don't you feel like, when you're reading the words and you're just kind of like confronted with what you're saying, it's very convicting, because then you're like,
it's easy to sing the words.
Yes, because that's very lilty,
not so easy to follow through.
Yeah, and then you're like, okay, Lord, I know what I just said to you. Oh, okay, you're going to have to help my heart. But so the question is, and when we say this, what does this look like, though, in a very practical standpoint? Because all of us have different places in life, different roles that we play. We're very different people. God has created us in different ways with different talents and different abilities and different interests. And how does that play into going to the Lord and saying, basically, here I am, send me? And in the studio with us, we have AJ Meyer here, who has really done just that in coming to Utah just recently and just saying, you know what, Lord, yes, there is a church that just needs a pastor right now, and I'm going to fill that position for a time, and just let me know what you want me to do. And this is just really a sweet spot of really obedience to the Lord.
And it takes more steps than that to get to the point where he's at. And that's we're going to hear part of his story today. AJ, you came to Christ at an early age, 4 years old?
4 years old, yeah.
Okay. And a little bit about that?
Yeah, so just kind of, I grew up in a small town in Indiana, about 1,000 people. My grandpa was the pastor of the Baptist church in town, so I kind of grew up in a family where we always went to church. I think it was the first 2 weeks of my life, I went to church 4 times. I went to 3 basketball games and 2 wrestling meets. And so my parents were definitely didn't have that fear of letting their baby out. So like we were always going places and doing things, and whether it was sporting events or to the races, and then also like to church. We were always in church. And so I don't ever remember a time when I didn't know that Jesus or God existed or didn't know about the Bible. And I just remember sitting there one day in Sunday school, and the lady was telling at the end the story of Jesus, that Jesus had lived a perfect life, and none of us live a perfect life, that Jesus had died on the cross, and that 3 days later he had rose from the grave so we could have our sins forgiven, and that one day we could go to be with him and we could have that relationship stored with him. And then I don't remember exactly what she said, but it was basically like, you need to make this decision whether you believe this to be true or not. And for whatever reason that day, I went, there's actually something I have to do with this. It's not just a story, it's not just information, but it's something that I have to wrestle with. Do I actually believe this is true or not? Do I actually want to put my faith and trust in Jesus or not? And so I actually didn't make a decision that morning, but I spent the rest of the day it just kept coming back to my mind. I think that was that still small voice that you're talking about, like, do you believe this is true? And I just kept thinking, like, do I believe this is true? I remember laying in my bed like that night, and I was like, I need to actually decide, like, do I believe this is true or not? And begin to wrestle this as I was laying in my bed, and I was like, you know what? I do believe this is true. Like, I haven't just heard it, I don't just know it, but I actually believe that Jesus really did do this, and he actually did do what he said he did, and that by me putting my faith in him, I can receive the benefits that he says I receive. And it was really a lot simpler than that. I was 4 years old, but all I remember was this like extreme peace came over my heart, something I can't really explain, and I just went to sleep. And so it was just this like, and so yeah, it was really simple, but it was just this really clear need for me to decide whether or not I believe that is true or not.
Mm-hmm. I love that. 4 years old. 4 years old. Yeah, that's wonderful.
And later in life, more in line with our topic of conversation today, you had to make decisions on what following him looked like.
Yeah, so I grew up in an environment where we went to camp a lot. And if you've ever been to like a Christian camp before, one of the things they would have is they'd have an opportunity for you to commit to Jesus. That you would go wherever he wants to go, say just like the same words that you guys are using. And I remember doing that. You know, when you're 8 years old, there's not a lot of what we'd call a cost of following Jesus. And it's this, you're committing mostly to do things that are like, you know, they're talking about, well, would you someday go to Africa? Well, when I'm 9, I'm probably not going to Africa. And so you're kind of like disconnected from the reality of the decisions in some way. And so it's not that the decision's insincere, but the consequence, the cost of that decision isn't real. And when I was 13 years old, we had a youth program through Word of Life, and which is really big back on the East Coast in some churches. And we were really involved. And they had this program called Teens Involved. And the goal, it's set up like a competition, but the goal is to get kids to explore how God might have gifted them and how they can use those giftings to serve the church and to serve the community. And so it was something our church had just started kind of doing in the last couple of years. And so they were really trying to encourage kids to get out and explore. And, you know, and it's kind of one of those things, like if you try something, you're like, I hated that went terrible, I don't think I ever want to do that again, then that's okay. And then maybe next year you try something else. And the goal is this exploration. And if you find something you like, there are mentors there through the competition that give you feedback and help you grow in your gifting. So it was a pretty cool opportunity. And we had this opportunity to do a presentation. And about the time I was about ready to get my black belt in Taekwondo. And so my mom's like, hey, what if you were to share the gospel using your Taekwondo? And which sounded great. You know, I have the opportunity to share Jesus. It's a really safe environment.
And beat people up. That's great.
Yeah, it's great. That's great. So
don't want to be in the front row that day.
Yeah.
You gotta really watch out. And so, but the one problem was I had this severe fear of speaking in front of people. Like I'd rather go to Africa and be killed by the tribal people than speak in front of people.
Nice.
And you know, and so there was this fear there, this real fear of more than death on some level. And so my mom was like, well, why don't you pray about it? And I was like, okay, I guess I can pray about it. And I just couldn't shake that God wanted me to do this, and it didn't really make sense. So I sat down with my grandpa. We put together, had to be under 10 minutes. I put together a 7-minute presentation. And if you've seen, there's all kinds of books and beads with different colors, you know, gold or yellow, black, red, you know, there's all these different colors. And basically I did the same thing, if you've seen that presentation, with my belts. And then I broke a board showing that God, when Jesus died on the cross, he broke the sin barrier between us and him. And now we have access to relationship with him because he broke the barrier. And so it was, so I did it, and they're like, hey, you're going to go to this competition. You're going to be up against all these older kids. Don't expect to go. But before we went, I had to actually do the presentation in our church. And so I did the presentation at our church, and, you know, it's all the old ladies coming up and pinching your cheek and telling you how
you did a good job.
Yeah, you did a great job. And I'm like, I don't remember anything. I thought I was going to throw up the whole time. Like, I'm not really sure I'm really that good a speaker, you know.
You sounded so confident.
Yeah. But they you know, and they're doing their job of encouraging. They're just excited to see younger people excited to use their gifts. And so they're doing their job as the grandmothers of the church. And, you know, so I went to the competition expecting not to make it, and I placed in the top 5.
Oh, wow.
And was able to go on to the next one. And so it's like, okay, we weren't really expecting that. Did we go on the next one? There were some other people in our group. And so went from kind of like our area of the state to like a regional. So it was like a tri-state type thing. I was like, well, I might as well go do it again. They're like, oh, by the way, you have to go do the presentation somewhere before you can go to the next level of competition, and it has to be somewhere else. So I was like, oh, so I have to do it twice. I was like, okay, well, and I'm kind of a stubborn kind of like, I'm going to see this through type thing. And so I think if nothing else, like, all right, I did this, I'm going to see this through, even though I hate it. And I'm just going to kind of push through and do it. And so I went and I did the presentation at my grandpa's Awana, which is a program for like, who was in my, the kids I was going to be speaking to were the elementary age kids. So I got done, had an opportunity for kids to trust Jesus as their Savior for the first time. And I think it was like 4 kids went back and trusted Jesus as their Savior for the first time, which was really cool, but didn't change the fact of how much I hated doing the presentation. And so went back. Even more surprising, I placed in the top 5 again and had the opportunity to go to the international competition, which is at this camp in Schroon Lake, New York. And my parents were like, hey, you were a 7th grader, we never thought you'd make it. And so they're like, we were willing to pay for you to go to camp. I have a friend who their church always goes. And so like, we'll drive you up there, you can go with them. And we'll send you to the camp if you want to go do it. And of course, I had to do the presentation one more time. So I did it for our elementary kids program, and like 3 kids trusted Christ or something. I don't remember the numbers, but it was like really cool. I was like, okay. And so we got out there. I did my presentation, had an awesome week at camp, and a couple big things happened. But the biggest thing related to this was we were sitting there at the fire the last night, and kids were coming forward and coming to faith, and it was really cool. And then, the opportunity for you to like, are you willing to follow Jesus wherever he wants to go? This kind of same type of question. Really willing to go, you're willing to say, you're willing to do what God wants you to do. And I was like, well, it's probably good to just like keep reaffirming that I'm willing to follow Jesus. And I was about ready to get out of my seat, and what they're having people do is throw a stick in the fire. And all of a sudden it dawned on me, like, what if God like wants me to speak in front of people for the rest of my life?
No.
Yeah, like my biggest like just guttural fear. And so for the first time I began to interact with this idea, like, what if it's going to cost me to follow Jesus? And Jesus talks a lot about there's a cost to following him, and while it's not easy, sometimes he says it's worth it. And I began to wrestle with, like, do I believe that the God who created me has my best interest in mind? Do I believe that his plan for me, even if it is speaking in front of people, is better than my plan? And I began to wrestle with these real questions I think we all wrestle with as we're trying to follow God. And some of us, it's a really easy no, I'm not going to do that. And we just find it easy to walk away. And other of us, we wrestle with stuff for a long time. So I wrestled with it. I went forward that night. I don't know, but that's I'm not sure all my motivations or all that. But in the end, to this day, it's something that I kind of look back on as this very pivotal moment in time where I stepped out to follow him, and then came back and through a series of events and different opportunities, and I think it was just God orchestrating, and I ended up doing that presentation all over the Midwest and saw a lot of people come to faith in Jesus, and God provided a lot of cool opportunities. And one of the things that I ended up adding to the presentation was encouraging these kids and these teens to use the gifts that God has given them to go and to say and to do the things that God has for them, because and we just have an opportunity for them to commit that. Because, when I first started doing this, I was 13 years old. And, so like I was not that much older than some of the kids I was delivering the message to. And so I think we put a lot of obstacles. God can't use me because, or one of the things that really infuriates me is when we look at younger people and go, well, God really can't use them. And like one of my presentations, like basically started a revival in the church, which has nothing to do with me. And what I said, all I did was get up there and preach the gospel, and half the people in the church came to faith.
And you're like, huh?
And I was just like, huh? And the pastor was so astonished and went like, oh, like we've really been missing the boat here. And it's this, and it has nothing to do. Yeah, I wasn't really a polished speaker or all that, but it was more of this. That God was doing something, and all I did was show up and said what I thought what he asked me to say. I faithfully told him what the Bible says, and in the end, he does whatever he's gonna do. And it's not my job to create the results, but it's my job to be faithful. And I learned a lot about faithfulness and just showing up and doing what I'm supposed to do. and then trusting that God's going to take care of the rest.
That is so fascinating, so wonderful. And it is interesting that, you look at these big, like, celebrity speakers and whatever, and they have everything going for them. They're polished, they're cool, they got panache and and charisma. And yet God is going to use a 13-year-old boy with a black belt in Taekwondo, and he's going to use that child, in order to bring more people to himself, a relationship with the Son. Incredible. And that should really spur us to think about our own situation. Can God use you? Well, he can use kids. He can use situations. But are you willing? Are you willing to be used by God? We're going to talk more about that in just a little bit. Got a text from our good friend Dustin, says that he would be willing to keep my house for me.
All right.
Clean my house.
Bring it, Dustin.
Yeah. 855-539-4583 is our text line.
Perhaps today there are loving words which Jesus would have me speak. There may be now in the paths of there may be now in the paths of sin some wanderer whom I should seek. I was wondering what that noise was. Oh, Savior, if thou wilt be my guide through dark and rugged way, my voice shall echo thy message sweet. I'll say what you want me to say.
We are talking about listening to the Lord, being used by the Lord, and finding out where he wants us to go, what he wants us to say, and who he wants us to be. We have AJ Myers in the studio with us this morning, talking about his own personal journey with the Lord, and already at the young age of 13, how the Lord chose to use him in his weakness, afraid to talk in front of people, and yet the Lord, because of AJ's obedience, the Lord did some amazing things, not just in his hometown, not just in a couple of states, but basically throughout the whole region where he lived. And that is a tremendous thing, that God would use people who are weak and not that exciting compared to the rest of the celebrities of the world to do amazing things to influence others to Jesus. How cool is that? But there is way more to your story. And so let's move on. Let's move on. Fast forward a number of years.
Yeah, so it's just kind of that started a process that ended up leading me going to Appalachian Bible College, where I majored in Bible theology along with everybody else who goes there. And then everybody has a what they call a ministry minor. Now everybody has a double major. And so I ended up, I have a minor in camping.
Ooh, cool.
And so so it was always fun going home, and everybody's like, that chemistry final was really tough. And I was like, you should have seen my vertical caving final. and so most of the people, they think I'm like learning to fish and
Put up a tent
and start a fire, and how do you get a degree and all that.
Yeah.
And basically how we describe it is it's how to administer camp and adventure programs with a Christian, a gospel emphasis. And so it's actually a pretty rigorous program. Like our professor would teach some of our undergraduate courses as graduate courses at other schools for their program. So it was a very high intense program as far as workload and the content and things like that.
But it's all worth it when you think of the hope of the amazing money that you're going to make after graduating with a camping degree.
Oh yeah, there's just like jobs lining up, especially in 2008 when I graduated at the height of the economy. And
great.
And so I graduated. When I graduated, so I met my wife Liz, and we were in college, same program, same year. And we had I had 3 opportunities. The people that wanted me to come work with their programs, and the one we ended up going to was her. During junior high, she had worked with this adventure company at the time was Discovery Outfitters. Later, we became Peak 7 Adventures through a pretty cool God story. But and so we ended up coming to Oregon. The Adventure Ministry had just moved to a camp, and so we ended up going there and coming on staff and helping run that program for about 3 years. Then we ended up merging with Peak 7, and so in total, we basically did the same adventure ministry for about 10 years.
Wow. Wonderful.
So in this ministry, you're taking at-risk youth into nature and exposing them to that
Bears.
Evil world of nature.
Raccoons.
Yeah, so I ran the Oregon program, and so we ran 1 to 7 day adventure trips with basically rock climbing and rafting. So we did single day rock climbing, single day rafting. Then we also did multi-day rafting, which is basically we had a big boat we call the gear boat. It's an 18-foot raft. And when you put everything on there for the 16 people for up to 4 days, it weighs about 2,000 pounds. And so one of the guides would row that down the river along with the other 2 guides. We could put up to 2 or 3 of those groups on at a time. And basically, yeah, we would go, we worked mostly with youth. We would work with groups primarily. And so I worked with everything from church groups and like Boy Scout type groups down to I worked with drug and alcohol programs, homeless youth, girls who've been trafficked, just kind of a very wide-ranging group. And one of the things, especially when we joined Peak 7, is they raised a lot of money to do heavily discounted trips as we partnered with these organizations. I worked with kids who have never seen live cows before. The first time I saw a live cow was on the trip. I've never seen more than maybe 2 or 3 stars. Never left the Portland, Vancouver metro area. Never left the Seattle metro area. So you're working with kids who don't have a limited outdoor exposure. I mean, they have no outdoor exposure, and their first time camping is at night and on the trip and things like that.
You did show them some animals besides the cow, right?
Yeah, sometimes.
Maybe a friendly squirrel or
friendly
moose
squirrel or kind of whatever.
Cougar,
yeah. Whatever we find, but it was just kids would get really excited over seeing cows. Usually we'd see deer, wild horses were pretty common. We'd see other fish or whatever, and so the ministry's in the desert, so we're a little more limited on our wildlife and vegetation and things like that being in the desert. But they got to see a lot of cool new things. But we would sleep out under the stars on tarps because it's pretty much no rain and just absolutely no light pollution, just amazing beauty of the stars, and so things like. God numbers the stars when you've only seen 3 stars, like concepts like that take on a whole new meaning when you see all the stars and you talk about each star could be like maybe a galaxy, not just a star, or things like that. And trust takes on a whole new meaning. Trusting somebody at the top of a cliff, 40-foot cliff, takes on a whole new meaning versus sitting down and just talking about it in a theoretical conversation.
It sounds like you had a lot of gospel opportunities in doing something like this. Like it wasn't just like, hey kids, here's nature, have fun, and you have a break from life for a while. But there was a great purpose in all of this as well. Explain that to us a little bit more.
Yeah, so there's 3 what we call our 3 ministry parts. One is we would do Bible studies and engage those conversations, and a lot of times the kids are hearing the gospel for the first time. And second is we would tell our stories, much like we tell told my story there in 5-10 minutes. We tell our story, and this is what it looks like to hear God and respond to God. And because a lot of people are just like, well, what do I do? How do I hear God? How do I respond to God? So we tell our stories and give them an opportunity to respond to God. And then the other one was, I guess there's really 4. One is we'll do what we call debrief of activities. And so we'd do an activity and then we'd help them kind of relate that to life. And sometimes that would get intertwined with a Bible study or things like that, and kind of helping them bridge the activity. So it's more than just the activity, but what they learn, what do they feel, and how do we take that back into something they can transfer into life. And then the 4th one is just having conversations. And so like a lot of the guides we're working with were 18 to 24-year-old people who are sometimes their first ministry. So we're teaching them how to do Bible studies. We're teaching them how to share their story for the first time. And we're teaching them how to, ask good questions, to draw kids out, to figure out where they really are, both in debriefs, but also in just relationships. And that's a huge part of the ministries. You're floating down the river. It's not all just rapids. And sometimes it's cold. And you have the opportunity to have conversations. And all of a sudden the kid's talking about his home life. And, we've had kids get sent on trips because mom and dad are getting a divorce that week and they don't want the kids to be there. And that's why they're on the trip. And just like, and you're just talking to kids and because you're taking an interest in them, they're just willing to throw out information. And if we're actually listening to the information we're giving, we're seeing what's the pain of sin in life and circumstances that it's going on in their life. Mm-hmm. We also might be able to see what God is doing in their lives in some very simple ways. And so you can just learn a lot by just listening to people and And I find that when you're willing to listen to somebody, they're oftentimes very eager to share what's going on in their life, and it's very easy to see like how God could be trying to work in their lives as we listen to them.
It's interesting that the agency that God is using is this outfitters thing, this adventure deal, but really the whole purpose behind it is letting people know that you care, that even more importantly, that God cares, and sharing with them what God has done, what God will be doing, and maybe for the first time for these people to understand that God isn't in a box in life, right? Like you don't have this God box, and some people have it and some people don't, and then you have all these other boxes in life, but instead that God cares about every aspect of our lives, every little nook and cranny, everything. He wants to be a part of our lives, and he can redeem even the worst situations, but it takes having that opportunity to open up and then to listen and to care and to love. And it's neat because you have that interest of camping, and you've had all this background of sharing and learning about how to present the gospel in a winsome way. And then God's using all of that to not just to, here's a person and I save that person, but to actually make a difference in somebody's lives and show them the love of God. That is incredible. And that's just the agency he uses. So my friend, as we're listening, we can ask ourselves, what is God allowing us to do? What interests do I have that God, I could just say, here I am, Lord, send me. This is where you've put me so far. How can you use this in order to glorify your name?
Yeah. And AJ, help us out here now. There's many of us that really don't like to speak in front of people, and God has you doing that now. Was there something that was there a point where this transitioned from this fear to something that you enjoy?
Yeah,
or you're not there yet.
No, it's definitely there, but it took. I would say by the time I was ready to leave for Bible school, I'd made that transition. So that transition happened over a space of about 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
And some people it just doesn't maybe happen, and that's okay. But it's the willingness to try, and and just going like, I think God's giving me this opportunity and I'm going to try. And it may just be for that opportunity to accomplish something that God has for us. And then, other times we will find that as we begin to explore something that we never thought we would like, that God begins to open up a whole new world to us that we never saw before, and how he has gifted us and the desires and passions he's putting inside of us. But we got so wrapped up in our own world and what's going on that we just kind of haven't had the opportunity to see that yet.
Mm-hmm. We don't have a lot of time left, maybe in 3 minutes here. Right now in your life, you're kind of like in between things, if you will. How is that? How is your listening to the Lord? What are you doing in order to prepare yourself for the next thing that maybe God has in store for you? Or is waiting just absolutely excruciating right now?
So I'm a terrible waiter. I'm a workaholic, and just a little backstory. I've basically been on a sabbatical for almost a year now. Done some things. During that time, I finished the remodeling and selling of our house. We lived in Costa Rica for about 4 months. We've, for about a month in there, I helped the adventure ministry. They needed some short-term help. I helped them for a little while. I'm kind of a small business, so I've done a little bit of work here and there, but I haven't had this 9-to-5 job. And I'm coming from a spot where I had a job. I was running the youth group at our church. A couple other ministries at our church on top of the adventure ministry, and running a business. So I'm used to being very busy and all these things to do. And so I've been just trying to be very patient with what God is doing and where we're going. And so it's really hard for me, especially it's been almost a year, and it's a long time. And one of my goals is to be faithful where God has us now. And so all along we've had some opportunities to minister, and though we've scaled back, trying to figure out what God is doing now. And sometimes I can get too excited about what God's going to do somewhere down the road, and I'm not paying attention to what God is trying to do now. We do that with younger people. Well, when you get older, you're going to do these things. Well, what about what God wants to do now in those kids? And so that's kind of where I'm looking. We're trying to be faithful to what God is doing us now, the people he puts into our lives. We had some opportunities to see some real growth, and 2 of the volunteers with Peak 7 while we were there for a month and just having conversations with them. And the two of the guys ended up connecting with each other through some of the conversations we've had, and they're now having their own Bible study, and they're encouraging one another, and they're growing with one another. And it wasn't big. We just hung out with them, and we're engaging them in beyond surface level conversations. And they went like, oh, we're both seeking this. What if we got together and began studying the Bible and we're able to do this for each other? So I think there's just, and we were only there for a month, and I may never see those people again, but God used us in a very simple way to accomplish something that he was already doing in their lives. And I think that's just like being faithful in whatever God is doing today, because he's trying to do something in everybody's life around us. And I think oftentimes we forget that. We forget God is working. God is always trying to do something. What is he trying to do? And how do I be a part of that in either a big way or a small way? But being a part of that is what's important.
Right now where you are.
Mm-hmm. And we need to be content with that, because God is in control. He's sovereign, and he has a plan. And do we trust that? Do we trust that God has a plan for us? Then we rest in him, and we love him. We get to know him better and better each day. That's really what we're seeking, God and his righteousness and all those things, whatever it is, your heart's desire, he'll add all that. But are we content? And a person once said to me, and I love this, God does not want us to know the future. He wants us to know him. That's important. So be present where you're at. Let the Lord use you in any way that he wants to. And just remember that he's in control, and he loves you, and he does have a purpose for you. And you just keep running to him. AJ, our time went so fast. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us. It was so encouraging. And my friend, if you want to contact us, please do so at keyradio.org. You have yourself a fine day, and remember that God has a purpose for you, and he loves you very much.
This has been Mike and Heather in the Morning, a production of Key Radio, located in beautiful Provo, Utah. For more information about the program and the ministries of Key Radio, check out our website, keyradio.org. On behalf of Mike, Heather, and the entire Key Radio staff, have a blessed and glorious day.